Hey guys, okay, so today let's talk about why our gauge is important. So, how you measure your gauge, it's going to be different with every yarn. My gauge with this is going to be different than my gauge with this, okay? So, your gauge is going to be how many stitches you have in a 4x4 square. So, if I'm crocheting with this, it's a larger yarn, right? It's way bulkier, way bigger. So I'm going to have less stitches and possibly less rows in my 4x4 square, right? If I'm measuring my gauge with this yarn, I'm going to have way more stitches. So say I have 20 stitches in my 4x4 square for my gauge, okay? And then let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows. Okay, so 20 stitches and 8 rows. That is a lot different than using this and having 12 stitches and I don't know, I basically 8 rows. My rows pretty much stay the same. I might have less rows with this type of yarn, but you want to know your gauge because it's going to make your life easier. You want to know it specific to the yarn you're working with though. So they always say that you can take a sample piece, you can crochet a 4x4 sample piece if you want to of the yarn that you're working with. And then there is a website called stitchfiddle.com where you can actually go in and insert your gauge. So you can insert how many stitches you have in 4 inches of length and how many rows you have in 4 inches of width. And it will calculate for you how many stitches you need for your final project. So if I want to make a piece that's 23 inches long, I'm going to input that information. It's under Create Chart, and it's going to tell me how many stitches I ultimately want to have. But that's going to be a lot different if I'm using a thicker yarn versus a thinner yarn. So everyone's gauge is a little bit different. So if you see that on patterns, just know it's not a huge deal. It's just how loosely or tightly you're going to be working with your yarn. And it will be different for everybody. But keep in mind when you are doing certain patterns, you want to find a yarn that's going to be similar, because if you're using, say you're using my pattern for this, right? And you're making it with this yarn, it's not going to come out to be the same dimensions. So gauge is important. But it's nothing to fret about. When I first started crocheting, I didn't know anything about it. Okay, I didn't know what a gauge was. I didn't know how to measure it. But now using Stitch Fiddle, it helps me so much. I don't have to use as much graphing paper. I can design my patterns right there. I'll put the link in the comments below. It's just a site that I found. I am loving it though. So if you have any questions about your gauge, let me know. So 4x4 square, how many stitches you have in your column versus how many rows you have, okay? So that's your gauge. That's all it is. It's that easy. It doesn't have to be a headache. Don't let it scare you if you see that. Okay, thanks guys.